Now, we can blame the left for many ills society around the world suffers from, and we'd be correct. But what we can never take away from them is the ability to simplify and stupefy complex political and strategic debates while creating catchy, empathy-inducing slogans.
Welcome to the Holyland Dispatch podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Holyland Dispatch podcast. Today, I'd like to go over the simple solutions the opposition in Israel provides for the war in Gaza. But before we can do that, we need to describe the problem for which a solution is needed. I thought about it long and hard and crystallized it in the following statements. Israel is at war. There are 48 hostages at the time of recording still in Gaza, and Netanyahu is still Prime Minister. I'm not sure about the order or priority of items within the statement as it interests the opposition, but let's start with this and see where that leads us. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas placed the Israeli opposition in a very awkward position. Theoretically, it shouldn't have been complicated at all. After all, Israel was attacked, and the political agendas were supposed to be swept aside in favor of unity in response to the atrocities. Verbally, the opposition leaders said the right things. We're standing with the government of Israel in support of defending the citizens of Israel, etc., etc. But even then, something in the body language of their speakers, Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid being the central figures back then, was very uncomfortable. The sheer thought of having to stand shoulder to shoulder with their greatest enemy, Benjamin Netanyahu, very likely cost them a lot of sleep. Very quickly the narrative shifted. Even after Gantz had joined the emergency coalition, he kept signaling to his then base the clear message that they do not share Netanyahu's goals, priorities, or strategies. Through constant leaks from the war cabinet, they allegedly kept the resistance flame on, just enough so. It became very clear that the opposition was in a catch-22. They couldn't very well go completely against Netanyahu. On the other hand, the campaign of placing all the blame on him has begun. If they'd become the people who restrained the campaign, they'd suffer the electoral consequences. If they embrace it, they give up hope of stealing votes from Netanyahu. After all, they present themselves as so-called center, and not the actual left they are. Bibi also cut some of the branches on which they sat, when he halted military action to facilitate hostage deals. All in all, from the 250 plus hostages taken, most of the living ones were returned so far, and over 200 in total are back in Israel. This was an unprecedented situation, and unprecedented actions must have been taken. We can argue about how well it was done, of course, but I doubt that the families of the 200 returned hostages regret it was done. I'd like to use this opportunity to clarify that anything I say here relates to the political actors and not the families of hostages, to whom I have no words of criticism to offer. These political actors include members of the Knesset, as well as the cynical opportunists who'd stop at nothing to back at Bibi. Back to the opposition. In order to separate itself from the official policies of Bibi's government, the left needed a message. They went with three main slogans. Bring them home now, and/or deal now. Stop the war. You are the head, you are to blame. Now, we can blame the left for many ills society around the world suffers from, and we'd be correct. But what we can never take away from them is the ability to simplify and stupefy complex political and strategic debates while creating catchy, empathy-inducing slogans. How can anyone not relate to these slogans? Who doesn't want all the hostages back now? Who disputes the responsibility of a prime minister for anything happening in his domain? Who wants war? Surely this is something we can all agree on, right? The problem of the opposition, and by proxy their supporters, is that, well, life generally is not simple. Let's take their slogans one by one and see how simple they really are. Bring them home now, or deal now. The first and obvious issue is that it's a cynical claim of ownership of the empathy for hostages, as if the people on the right want something different, as if Netanyahu wants something different. But beyond it being virtue signaling, I'd like to understand, what does that mean? What does now mean? The opposition either believes that Netanyahu is the sole obstacle for the return of the hostages, or they don't believe it but still states it as fact. If it's the latter, then, well, cynical hypocrites are not worthy of any kind of support. If it's the former, I'd like to question the depth of their analytical capabilities, because, and here it ties to the second slogan, Stop the War, there is no way Hamas agrees to return all hostages without putting an end to the war, without completing its mission statement to eliminate the existential threat on Israel. When asked about that, the opposition supporters will say, first, let's bring back all the hostages, even if it means stopping the attack on Hamas. After that, we can always go after Hamas again. However, Hamas will insist, because they have no choice, that the war will be stopped with binding international guarantees that Israel does not continue attacking them. At which point, in every such conversation I had, the opposition supporters' response was, well, we must bring everybody home. Well, yes, I get it. But what is the price you are willing to pay? Because there are no free lunches, not in reality. The response is, any price. And that is indeed the danger with the left. They are willing to pay Hamas any and every price, or as it's really called, ransom. Are they willing to pay any price in order to eliminate Hamas, for example? The answer is of course not. They can't bear being disliked by the anti-Semites they normally collaborated with in their blind hate for the Israeli Prime Minister. They can't stand being criticized by people like two-tier Keir Stammerer or happy-slappy Emmanuel Macron. Their knees buckle under the threats of the Belgians. What will the neighbors say? The war in Gaza also cost the lives of Israeli soldiers. They are definitely unwilling to pay that price. This price is indeed the most real, most dear, and the highest of costs in this war. Is it a price we need to pay? Well, the answer is a question. What is the alternative price? What price will we pay if we adopt the opposition slogans and stop the war without eliminating Hamas? Here's a very partial list. 1. Hamas will declare victory, and the forces that are aligned to eliminate Israel will draw great strength from this. 2. The Gaza Strip will remain an active threat to Israel. 3. The hundreds of soldiers that died would have died for nothing, or something close to it. 4. The countdown to the next October 7th will begin. 5. Jews will continue to become target for kidnapping. 6. The soldiers who would die in the next inevitable war in Gaza. I'm stopping here because I think I've made my point, as well as the fact that there would be prices that we don't see yet as a result of succumbing to Hamas's extortion. Now, all of this was said with the assumption that there is a modicum of honesty within the opposition's ranks. Another problem they have is that they are not honest. Their position is very clear and simple, unless Netanyahu shares it, of course. If Bibi decides to increase the military pressure, they will push on the hostages. If Netanyahu halts the army in favor of a possible deal, they will ask, why are we not attacking the enemy? The opposition is in a tight spot indeed, and they know it. That is why in the last 2 years they bounced from one messianic figure to the next. First it was Gantz, an ex-chief of staff and current cucumber. Then it was Yair Golan, a complete hack. then Gadi Eisenkot, another ex-chief of staff who was collaborating with Gantz and now split from his party. Now it's back to the crook Naftali Bennett. Which brings us to the actual, factual slogan that at the very least has a tiny bit of honesty in it. The "you are the head, you are to blame" campaign. The premise that the PM is always responsible is acceptable. We can agree that Netanyahu is definitely among the people under whose shift October 7th happened. Yet, the opposition is being facetious and borderline diabolical when it comes to this accusation. Again, it's a matter of their utter inability to look past simplistic slogans. I'd like to suggest a few questions that the opposition might use for some self-reflection. Who are the other people involved in the decision-making along the years since 2005? Does that list include all of the leaders of the opposition who were PM? Does it include all of the army chief of staffs that, you'll never guess it, have all gone to lefty politics? Does it include all of the heads of Shin Bet that were preoccupied with bogus settler violence, quote-unquote, rather than gathering intelligence on the actual enemies? Does it include pretty much all of Israeli media who purposefully ignored the brewing pot of violence in Gaza? Here are a few more questions we might want to ask ourselves. Was the decision to pull out of Gaza criticized by anyone on the left? Were the deceptive Oslo Accords conducive to the attack on October 7th? Was the idea that a terrorist organization with a declared mission statement to kill all Jews can change its stripes led by the right or the left? There are plenty more where those came from, and the opposition refuses to even acknowledge them, let alone answer them honestly. Because their simplistic worldview revolves around kicking Netanyahu out of office, and the price Israel will pay be damned. But, as I mentioned, I do hold Netanyahu partially responsible. Let me ask a few more questions before we begin to wrap up. If Netanyahu was responsible for the failure of October 7th, what else was he responsible for? Was he responsible for the success in crippling Hezbollah? Was he responsible for the success of the operation in Iran, including the unprecedented cooperation with US on every level? Was he responsible for eliminating all of the heads of Hamas? Was he responsible for bringing home over 200 hostages? Of course not. Not in the eyes of the dishonest opposition. The above is attributed to the army, who failed in October 7th, the Shin Bet, who failed on October 7th, the Air Force, who failed on October 7th, definitely not attributed to the person the opposition says is the head and therefore responsible. So now what? Now we need to be pragmatic, because as opposed to what the opposition thinks, we cannot afford to be simplistic. Assuming Netanyahu bears some responsibility and at some point, preferably on schedule, re-elections are called for, who can we elect to replace him? I won't review all the options. Perhaps that's a topic for a separate episode. The bottom line is that now, in a time of an ongoing war, and even for a while after, there is no figure in Israeli politics that can be trusted to do a better job. Alright. I've spoken for a while now, and we covered quite a bit of territory, but this is but scratching the surface level. That fact alone means that the deceptive leftist views are way oversimplified. They do not offer any kind of alternative for Netanyahu, nor do they pose any constructive criticism. The opposition is an empty hole of hatred for Netanyahu, an empty shell of what used to be home to some real ideologues. The only simple truth about this war is that Hamas attacked Israel, fulfilling its stated mission to exterminate us, and that we have no other option, practically as well as morally, other than to eliminate this existential threat to our people. What questions do you have about this? What did I neglect to mention? Let me know and I might find cause to follow up on this topic. I will now simply bid you all farewell and God bless, and invite you all to come back and listen to the next episode of the Holyland Dispatch podcast.